Hello, this is Resource of the Week with Solano Connects, Mental Health, Service Access, and You. My name is Valentina Kelly.
And I'm Elena Starr. And this week, we are really excited to welcome back Riva Mullins, LMFT for student counseling at Torrey University, California. And we're so excited to hear about something that she is super passionate about, and that is advocating for a child with special needs. Thank you, Riva, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, welcome back. We're so excited to have you again. And so today's topic is something that you're pretty passionate about, right? Advocating for children and with special needs. Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. I would say several things. First, I have to share my own story, which was as a kid, I was a smart kid and precocious. But when I started school, I noticed early on that something was different about me. And I remember clearly being like in first grade and talking to my dad and saying, like, other kids know 1 + 1 is 2. And I was like, I don't automatically know that. I have to think about it, was the best way I could explain it to him at the time. But I always did, I was well behaved and I did well enough in school that, I always got promoted and got fairly okay grades. And the classes I didn't do well in, they would say that I wasn't motivated or as organized. So flash forward to my senior year of high school, the show, The Cosby Show, and they had a special on learning disabilities. And I think it was dyslexia. And so I went and asked to be tested for it. And so I got tested my senior year. And it turns out I have dyslexia and dyscalculia, which is like dyslexia for math. And it affects me a little bit differently than it affects people different ways. So it wasn't very obvious, but still it's been a barrier. It was a barrier. So when I got my test results, the psychologist, I remember her telling me that I had a pretty face and that I could make a good living, like at Macy's selling makeup. And in my head, I was like, oh, no, 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 no. But that motivated me to go to junior college and get help and get assessment. And once I got that help, I was able to do well for myself and well in school. So that experience reminds me when I work with children and my own children is just that for years, I dealt with feeling, low self-esteem or not good enough. And there was actually a real barrier that was happening that could have been lifted or gotten help. And so I became passionate about IEPs as one. I think if there's some people don't want to face a problem or don't want to get a label, but if you can get the support and information that you need to excel, and especially if you're in a position where you're advocating for a child or you're their parent, you're actually really helping them. Your fear is that you're going to hurt them, but with getting them the tools and the support that they need to be able to do well actually might save them lifelong of low self-esteem or feeling that they're not good at something when that's not the case. So that's been part of the reason why I've been passionate. In my former career, I started out as a child welfare worker. And so my job is basically to be in charge of their medical and educational needs as a social worker if they're a dependent of the courts. So I started having to attend IEPs or pay attention if children on my caseload's grades were suffering and trying to figure out why. So that was sort of how I cut my teeth on it. And getting children assessed really requires advocacy often. And then the IEP process is complicated, but they're basically services that they can put in place to help the child meet their educational needs and meet their milestones. So that's how I started out. And then I became a mom myself. And with my eldest child, I noticed early on that there were certain milestones that he wasn't hitting and just had some concerns. And I found out of a service that I didn't know prior to is that you can call your local school district and tell them that I think it's from ages 2 to 5 that you can ask to have them assessed. And so I did that just to see if I was totally off base. And they came out and they did notice like some fine motor delays and other things. So they were able to put him in a therapeutic preschool 2 days a week. They actually had someone come out to your home and help show you how to do things to encourage language if there's a speech delay and physical physical things that you can do to help with other delays, which was very, very useful in our case. But that got us into the system early on, and that naturally turned into an IEP because there were certain things that he just wasn't quite getting to grade level.
Yeah.
And then he's had an IEP ever since then. So that's kind of how I got started in it, and then became more passionate, obviously, as I became a mom that had to deal with dealing with IEPs, which is a whole nother thing.
Yeah, that's amazing you were able to find that resource. And it sounds like it's not something that's well known, maybe, or how did you find that?
Yeah, I had not heard of it, and I actually found out about it just at the park, and another mom had mentioned that she was getting her kid assessed.
Okay.
And so that's how I found out about it. And so I think in Solano County, you call the Solano County Office of Education,
Okay.
and that you could start that process if your child is under the age of 5, hasn't started school yet. But once your kid's in school, what I found is, so we got broken in early, and every doctor that has met with my son or educator always says like it's so good that he got those services early on and sort of got front loaded. But often what happens is sometimes it's hard to get your child assessed if you're not advocating for them or aware of things. The classes have a lot of students, teachers aren't always paying attention. I remember when I was a child welfare worker, I had a kid that was very delayed in speech, and so I was trying to get them an IEP, and the teacher told me that sorry, you'll know why I'm laughing in a minute, but she said, no, it's not a speech delay, the child's speaking Ebonics.
What?
Yes. So, which I told her, I said, I'm very fluent in Ebonics, and it's not Ebonics, and I would like an assessment. But so you really do have to advocate for your kids to get these services. And that's a real true story.
Wow.
And so the way that you get an assessment is that they have to assess your child if you write a letter. So you have to put it in writing, and usually you want to send it to the teacher and the principal. And you say that you want your child to have an assessment, and they have by law 30 days to respond. If they don't want to give the assessment, like there are cases where parent is noticing that their child might be having difficulty, but the child has great grades and doesn't seem to have a problem learning, then you're going to probably have to pay for an assessment outside of the school district. But if your child is actually having documented challenges in learning, then they have to do the assessment for you.
Got it. And can we backtrack a little bit? So when we say a child with special needs, so based on your experience, I imagine that special needs is a pretty big umbrella term, or it's a pretty broad term. What does that include? Do you happen to remember, or no? Not to put you too much on the spot.
Right. I actually, like, thinking out loud, I don't know the actual formal, but for me, what special needs would just be learning challenges. So it could, in my child's case, they have, dyslexia, dyscalculia, auditory processing, fine motor delay. I think that's it. So an ADHD. So a number of learning disabilities that come with that. And ADHD, this is important, isn't covered under the IEP necessarily. Like they will not assess for that. That's something you have to go through your doctor to get a diagnosis for.
Okay.
But they can address it in an IEP.
Got it. Okay. That's great to know.
And Riva, for those who don't know what an IEP is, could you touch on what it stands for and what it is exactly?
Yes, it's an individual educational plan, and they do a series of really extensive, they call it psychological testing, but it's more learning. So they find out the areas that the child is having challenges. You may even get a diagnosis, and then they can curtail their education plan to fit them. For example, a child that has attention and focus issues, it may be in their IEP that they're to be seated towards the front of the class, and that the teacher is to give them physical prompts, throughout whatever she's teaching, because the child has a hard time focusing, but, can be grounded by a pat on the back or a check-in. So that would be an example of how it works.
So it's essentially like in the name, like an individualized plan. So it's based off of the child, right? And then in like the meetings, there's multiple people who are in the meetings who decide kind of what the behaviors are and the reward system. And Is
Yeah,
that correct? Okay.
yeah, usually there'll be a school psychologist. When the children are younger, like below middle school, often all of their teachers will be present. As you get older, often only one of the teachers will be there, but you'll have a team of teachers that will be there. They'll tell you things that they're observing. You'll set goals. So if it's reading, your child needs to improve in reading, they'll say that the child will improve by 1/3 and it will be measured this way. So they'll give us a specific example of what they're looking for before they can check that milestone off. And then it just sort of adjusts. Usually you have it once a year, but you can ask to have an additional IEP anytime that you want. And then every 3 years, they do a broader IEP where they do the extensive testing again, just to see where the child's at and if there's anything new coming up.
Got it.
And what would be some advice that you would give to a parent that's new to navigating helping their child that might have a special need?
So first of all is that write a letter, like I said, put it in writing, and then you can go on the internet and just Google, IEP, requesting IEP assessment letter. And there's lots of templates that you can just copy if you're hesitant. And then make sure keep a calendar so you keep the dates. And then when you go into the meeting, some important things is that what I found with the school district is I think they're overwhelmed, and it's actually a known fact right now that special education is especially suffering. It's a shortage of teachers. So they're well-meaning people, but there's a lot of falling between the cracks, and also depending on what school district you're in. So it's so important that you attend these meetings and bring a friend if you need to, because it's usually you in a room of 5 or 6 people. It can feel intimidating. And sometimes the decisions they're making are on what's best for them and their schedule. And you're there to advocate for your kid and what's best for your kid. And you will have to advocate. So if you have a friend that's a teacher or a friend that has worked in special ed, sometimes just bringing that additional person can help you feel more supported, and it holds them more accountable. And then the other thing I would recommend is you can go on the internet and just look up your child's specific challenges, and then look up IEP specific for those challenges. For example, like a kid that has attention deficit disorder, they may be impulsive. So sometimes they get in trouble and do things more than other kids, but you don't want your kid to get suspended, because they do like slap boxing a lot or something. So you can actually have in the IEP that, if a child starts demonstrating impulsive behavior, that, step 1, 2, and 3 has to happen before they would just suspend a kid. So there's different things that you can put in place that sort of set your kid up for success, which you'll know more as you get to learn your child and how they behave in school and under pressure. But the meetings are super important. And then always push, because what happens is as soon as you get an IEP, then they start trying to take away the services that they give you. So if it's speech, they're like, oh, they made this mark, we don't think they need speech anymore. But if you think they need speech more, and you advocate for that, then often they're going to keep that in. Like for my child, I had a behavioral clause because he was a little bit impulsive, and there hasn't been any problems. And they're always trying to take that clause away, but I always make them keep it in there, because as your child gets older, if they have their behavioral problems impact their learning, or let's say something happens where, heaven forbid, there's a substance abuse problem or really severe behavioral problems, the school district would have to pay for those services. If some of those clauses are not in there, then they don't. And so it's really good to do your research just to know as a backup plan that you have that support. And then in Solano County, there's SELPA, and that is a good program that is a good resource that you can get an advocate, you can talk with someone about the pending IEP and just get extra additional support. And Matrix Parent Network, I don't know if you've heard of that, but they're very good too. It's a parent network and resource center, and it offers training and resources for special ed parents.
Wow.
And they actually have on Tuesday, February 7th, they are offering a Zoom class for understanding IEPs.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing.
I can email you all this.
Yeah, I don't think we had come across that yet. So that sounds like a great resource for parents.
Yeah, absolutely. I've utilized them before and it's been very, very helpful. Yeah, I had an IEP once where I really it was like the Cadillac of IEPs. I did like so much research and I had all these things I was requesting. And so when we got to the IEP meeting, they said that they didn't think that they could offer that. They weren't sure where I got it from. And then I can't remember. I think it was Selpa or might have been Mages, but whoever I talked to there, I said, well, then we won't have the IEP today. When it sounds like you're not sure of what you can offer, what you can't offer. So let's reschedule when you are. And then that person just was on the conference call. And so they had told me, no, no, no. And as soon as that person got on the conference call, it was yes, yes, yes. So it can make a huge difference.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, from what you're saying, from your experiences, both professionally and personally, there's a lot of advocacy involved from the parent. And so I imagine, on top of everything going on in life, this can also be something that kind of takes a lot of energy and stuff. So just wondering, do you have any advice about self-care or kind of balancing that? I imagine that, support is also needed.
Yeah, I think what helped for me is that I just had to realize when you have a kid and they have an issue, you want to address it and get them support and reinforce it as soon as possible. And that was sort of my mindset for a long time. But at some point I realized this is a marathon, it's not a sprint.
Yeah.
And you would approach a sprint and a marathon totally different. A sprint, you're just gonna go all out and give it all you got, but you burn out quickly. In a marathon, you have to train for it. You have to have self-care. You have to exercise. You have to, be sustainable. And that's kind of what it's like. So it is, you have to have the mindset that your kid's important. Yes, they are. But if you're not taken care of, if you're not strong, if you don't feel supported, you can't really be an effective advocate for them. And so moms often feel guilty. So that's what I had to do is I realized that old saying about when you're on a plane, the oxygen mask comes down. Who do you put it on? That if you're traveling with elders and children. And often people will say, oh, you put it on the children or the elderly person. And no, you put it on yourself first, because if you're knocked out, you can't actually help the people that are more vulnerable. So I have to keep that mindset and realize that self-care is also taking care of my family. So I would just say balance. Don't feel guilty if you exercise, if you need to exercise, and take time for yourself is hugely important because you're going to be more effective and impactful.
Thank you, Riva. And we just wanted to ask you also, was there anything else that you wanted to touch on that we didn't give you the opportunity to?
I would just say, yes, there is another thing. So the other thing that I run into, so because I was a social worker in the mental health field, and I actually have a learning disability myself, I don't have the stigma, I'm just let's figure out what the problem is and let's solve it. But so many parents that I've run into don't want to think that anything's wrong with their kid, or don't want to label on their kid. And so they're so fearful of that they will avoid reaching out for getting their child assessed or for services. And those early years are so crucial because, as you know, by the time the kids get to junior high, all hell breaks loose. And you don't necessarily have control, even if you might have well intentions. And to get those things in place actually is really going to help your kid. So I would just say, don't hesitate. It never hurts to get an assessment. And, hopefully nothing is wrong. But if there is, there's tools and support out there that can help you and make things better for your child.
That's great. And then before we wrap this up, do you have a favorite self-care technique or something that you do that maybe you could share so other people could incorporate it?
Oh my, well, I'm a very unorthodox person.
Great.
So well, I mean, sometimes there's been times so let me just paint the picture, and forgive me if my son ever hears this, but so he sometimes was a hot mess in school, and he's a wonderful, wonderful kid, super energetic and gregarious, but he could get in trouble. So there were periods, if we went through transitions, that I could be getting a phone call once or twice a day from a teacher, which is really hard when you're trying to work. And then you come home, and sometimes some kids with special needs spend the whole day holding it together at school. So when they come home, they just let it all out. And so dealing with behaviors when I get home. So it was exhausting at times. I will be honest with you. And so I didn't have the luxury to take a Calgon bath all the time as a single parent. So I had to find ways. So sometimes it might be that when I go to the gym, I put my headphones on and I'm listening to horrible gangster rap with lots of swearing, but that my kids can't hear. But that just sort of, and then I work out hard, and that just sort of gets out some of my aggression or frustration. Definitely taking baths if you have time. And then really, I think it's practicing it every day, like, which is hard. You have to be purposeful, but balance, making sure that you're not self-caring by eating Cheetos, and chocolate cake, which, is great in the moment, but then afterwards it's not so good for diabetes and waistlines. So just trying to realize that self-care means, eating healthy, working out, enjoying the good moments, because you definitely have lots of, hard moments. So really, really sort of savoring those good moments, because moments lead to minutes, minutes lead to hours, and hours lead to days. And eventually, it tips the scale. Those were the things that I would say. And the biggest thing is just don't feel guilty if you're doing something for you, because it's just going to make you a better and more present mom.
Oh, that was great.
Thank you so much, Riva, for joining us again today. We want to remind everyone that if you're looking for mental or emotional health resources and services, you can visit Solano Connects, which is spelled CONNEX.org. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.